I'm Doug Keck, and this is an EWTN Bookmark. Our guest author is Sam Guzman, the author of The Catholic Gentleman, Living Authentic Manhood Today, published by Ignatius Press, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com. Pleasure to meet you, Sam.
Thank you.
It's good to meet a gentleman these days. And people remember you were, a while back, you were on in the fall, I guess, with on Life on the Rock, talking a little bit about this book. What prompted you to write a book on the Catholic gentleman? Is there something special about a Catholic gentleman versus any other sort of gentleman?
I definitely think there is, and one of the biggest differentiators is that they're Catholic. But yes, I originally, well, first of all, I would say anybody in our culture would probably look around and say that there is a kind of crisis of masculinity in our culture, for lack of a better term. Men are confused about what it means to be a man. There's all kinds of mixed signals from our culture. Kind of, on the one hand, kind of an exaggerated masculinity that's all about aggressiveness and power, and and on the other hand, there's kind of an effeminate form of manhood that does not have that masculine strength, and then there's the gender confusion and things like that going on. So men are really just kind of questioning, like, what does it mean to be a man? In the past, maybe it was a little more straightforward. These days, there seems to be 25 different flavors of masculinity. So, kind of speaking into that, I wanted to offer a simple, accessible guide that would show men how to be men in a modern context, but above all, Catholic men, because I think there is a natural level of manhood in which we can be gentlemen, strong leaders, things like that. But also, we want to take it to the next level. We want to be saints. We don't just want to be, men that dress well or things like that. But we want to go beyond that.
Were saints gentlemen in general?
I would absolutely. I would say Christ was the first Catholic gentleman, and I would say that all the saints followed in his footsteps. And in my understanding, being a saint, being a Catholic gentleman is not bound by time. In the sense of a top hat or a bow tie or any of those cultural trappings.
I saw the one on the cover's got a bow tie.
Yeah, that's actually me. But the publisher decided to do that, as it wasn't my decision. But yeah, I think it's something that is really embodied in servant leadership.
Well, that's interesting too, because in looking at that picture, that's a certain almost kind of a little bit of a Northeastern or an academic kind of look, one might say. As a gentleman, other people think of gentleman, they think of very English kind of approach to a gentleman. But is there one sort of gentleman, or are there all different kinds of gentlemen? And if so, how do you define that? Where do you get the definitions that allow someone to say, yes, these are the definitions that fall into being a gentleman besides holding a door, being polite?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, I would say, first of all, there's many different kinds of gentlemen. Again, different cultures, different time periods. A gentleman in 16th century France would look quite different than a gentleman in Japan in 1920. There's different cultures and different ways of the external trappings, if you will. But I would say internally, gentlemanliness is a definite, defined thing, and I think it's really captured in that Christ-like servant leadership. First and foremost, you embody that virtue, that self-possession, that ability to rein in those masculine appetites that we all have, and which are good things, but if we're not brought under control of virtue, they can easily run away and cause a lot of problems. So
right. Now, you've got the forward by our old friend Dale Alquist, who people remember obviously related to G.K. Chesterton for many years here on EWTN. He mentioned that the word gentleman has fallen into disrepute. And he goes on to say, when men stopped behaving like gentlemen, women stopped behaving like ladies. Women started asserting their rights because men had stopped recognizing them. Women started doing manly chores because men had stopped doing them.
That's right, yeah. Yeah, and I would say that we, as men, have kind of failed to rise to the occasion and be the gentlemen that we're called to be. And again, those who lay down our lives on behalf of others in imitation of Christ. And that can be, the ultimate sacrifice, as, many of our soldiers have showed us, or things like that. But in practical daily life, it often just means those little sacrifices, those acts of self-giving in which we show love to others and we give of ourselves. And men have used to show a great deal of respect to women. They'd stand up when a woman would walk in the room. Maybe they'd stop telling the bad jokes or the the foul language or whatever. There was a great deal of honor shown to women, and when we abandoned that, a competitive streak entered in, and women said, well, if you're not going to treat me with that honor and dignity, we're gonna go to war, so to speak, and the rise of feminism and kind of the battle between the sexes that's been going on now for I don't know, maybe 60 to 100 years almost.
Do you tend to find in some of this and doing the research and looking through the book in the sense, while you were putting it together, the idea that in some cases you tend to see media all the time where women are incredibly strong and aggressive,
yes,
very much in former male roles, and the male role that's seen as a positive is the much more feminized kind of touchy-feely guy.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I could give examples from pop culture, but this is really everywhere where there's this kind of powerful, aggressive female figure who's really rescuing the bumbling, incompetent man from ruining everything, and that goes from everything from sitcoms to superhero movies. Right. It's everywhere in our culture, and it sends a powerful message that men absorb a lot of times unconsciously, but we do absorb it.
Now, when you put this book, you said, I wrote this book not because I have some unique wisdom to share, but because I believe that the Catholic and Apostolic Church does. So how did you go about gleaning that? Was that something you sensed right away? Is that something you looked into and got greater insights as you reviewed it?
Well, I'm a convert, and as I came into the church, I really realized the depth of wisdom that the church had to offer everyone, but especially men who are kind of lost about what their vocation is today. And I think that's really embodied in the Catholic teaching around the meaning of fatherhood, but also the teaching that just permeates everything about being Catholic, the emphasis on sacrifice as inseparable from love. And I think that's something that our culture has lost to a great deal. That connection.
Right. So, in you becoming Catholic, did that help you with understanding true manhood? I mean, was that something you yourself were dealing with, or you saw your friends and family dealing with, and becoming Catholic helped you solidify that, or?
Yes, yeah. And I think on the one hand, obviously there's Christ, and images of like the Sacred Heart and things like that are both powerful and yet tender, and that's a perfect balance. Christ embodies that perfect balance of strength, but also compassion and mercy.
Right.
And likewise, the saints, the thousands of male saints, embodied both that courage to confront evil and sin and things like that, but also a great deal of compassion and tenderness and for the weakest, and many wonderful saints who lived among the poorest of the poor and gave their lives in service to them, but also many bold and courageous saints, who confronted the powers of their day and called them out on their sinfulness. So I think that is not seen hardly anywhere else in the world. It's either, again, like I said at the beginning, kind of an effeminacy of weakness, or an exaggerated, hyper-aggressive masculinity.
Machismo kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think the Catholic Church, the saints, and ultimately Christ himself, who they're imitating, embody that perfect balance of tenderness and compassion and mercy, but also strength.
Now, you mentioned in the beginning in the preface that the book offers short chapters on various aspects of manhood designed to be read in just a few minutes. They stand alone, focusing on a single idea. Did you do that because you assume men have limited attention span, or what?
Well, I know they do. Yes, I think men do have attention spans just in general, but also, our culture has exacerbated the kind of ADD that men can sometimes naturally have. I mean, men do read books, but a lot of times, they would rather be doing something with their hands or, out in the world somewhere. But I do think that I wanted to make it as accessible as possible so that no one would have an excuse to say, I don't have time for this, I'll set it on my stack. I wanted to make it something you toss in your briefcase, your backpack if you're a college student, that you could just grab something, reflect on it for a few minutes.
You can pick it up and just read it quickly, and that
yeah.
kind of thing like that.
Yeah.
Now, in the section Quest for Authenticity, you say, for decades, modern men have been fed a steady diet of fake. Well, what is this fake, and who's feeding it to them?
Yeah, well, and I would say, culturally, just we kind of revel in fake in general. Like I mentioned a story in there of someone gluing a stone facade on a house, or the cars, it's made to look like metal, but it's really plastic.
Right.
I was in a big Ford truck, and the girl's really aggressive, but it's just plastic. So there's just that inauthenticity baked into our culture. But also for men, again, I think it goes back to those cultural archetypes that are held up, where it's like, hey, you got big biceps, you're a real man, but really you could be a little boy inside. You've never achieved any level of self-mastery beyond the physical.
Or you could be a total narcissist.
Right, exactly, yeah. So, it's all about the externals in our culture. How many women you've been in bed with, or how big your muscles are, or how high you've risen in the ranks of the corporate world. Right. And yet there's so little inner substance there. And I think the Catholic gentleman is found in that inner manhood.
Right. So see, you talk about the grand illusion. You look like you're a little too young to be a Styx fan, but that was a famous song by them, which talked about the grand illusion in society. Now, are you one of those bearded hipsters you talk about here?
No, I don't think I'm cool enough to be a hipster, but I do think that is something that is in our culture, men trying to find that authentic identity, for better or worse. And but I'm not.
You're not one of them.
To be a hipster.
So you asked the question at the end of that: how do we know if we are the real deal? How do we know?
Yeah, well, I think essentially at some point our manhood has to be put to the test. We have to leave the safety, the comfort of all that we've known and that maybe we grew up with, and kind of step out into the unknown, get uncomfortable, do something challenging, push ourselves, and prove both to ourselves and to others that we have what it takes to be a man. And oftentimes, life throws things our way, whether it's some unexpected suffering, or sometimes it's something that we choose for ourselves. But there's usually some defining moment, whether chosen or not, that kind of makes us pass through that transition from boyhood to manhood. We have to pass that test, and in past cultures, they would have these initiation rituals that were kind of ritual forms of this test.
Right.
But we've kind of lost that. So oftentimes.
So you want to bring back the bullet ant test?
Oh no, yeah, definitely not. But
why don't you tell us what that is and why you put it in there?
Well, I wanted to illustrate, how cultures would, show the link between suffering and manhood. You having to overcome that, and basically they would sew bullet ants, which are the most painful insect sting in the world. They call them that because it feels like getting shot with a bullet. And then sewing those into this glove, and then putting it on your hands, and you have to dance around for, I don't know, 15 minutes, half an hour, and not pass out.
Right.
And, this was an Indian tribe in South America that would do this. And, I personally think it's a bit barbaric, but the point is, they were pushing these boys to the brink. And if you pass that test, there was no question in anyone's mind in your village or your community or anywhere that you are a man. You passed the ultimate test, and you never doubted that yourself. There was this inner confidence that came with having passed that.
But you make the point that in our culture, there's no one to tell us that, right?
Right, yeah. Unfortunately, a lot of times it's the football coach kind of becomes that initiator who pushes you to confront yourself and to overcome your own weakness and things like that. Or sometimes it's joining the military, or, again, sometimes there's things that aren't choices at all. They're things that just happen to you. But we have to get a little bit creative in our culture how we find these. For me, I would say one moment, not, it wasn't just one moment, but one moment in particular that I think of was just kind of joining the wrestling team in high school. And I was kind of a bookish weakling, and loved comfort, and boy, they pushed me to the limit. I mean, I just wanted to die so many times, and there was still an hour of practice left of running stairs and doing push-ups and sprints, and it about killed me, but it made me so much stronger, so much more confident in myself and my own ability to overcome suffering. So it was incredibly good for me.
Well, it seems like today, though, in certain cases, and you always have to be careful because it can be overdone, that any form of that kind of pushing that pushes somebody to the edge, there's a lot more, well, you're overdoing it, you're, what are you, a masochist here, or you're a sadist for forcing these kids to run extra laps and things like that. And we do have to be careful, but it seems like sometimes the society then, kind of rubber bands back too far.
Right, and there's a quote I heard once that was like the 40% rule, and it was an ex special forces guy who came up with this. It basically said, when you feel like you're gonna die and you can't go any further, you're only at 40% of your potential. You can go 60% beyond that, which is really kind of mind-blowing if you think about it. But there's so much more potential in there that men have that can be unlocked if someone challenges us to rise to the occasion.
But you mentioned the fact that much of the crisis of manhood is due to the absence not only of initiation rights, but also the initiators, meaning that who is doing that challenging these days, and who you're listening to. The other interesting fact is you brought up the idea it's easy to blame the sexual revolution on the epidemic of fatherlessness, and that kind of, but you go back to the Industrial Revolution. How so?
Yeah, well, I think if you look at an agrarian society, which was society up until maybe the mid-1800s, there was fathers and sons lived together in very close proximity. I mean, they were working in the fields all day together. They were, milking the cow, slaughtering the cow. Just everything they did was together, and it was a complete training ground, a proving ground for that young man, watching his father, imitating him, learning what it meant to be a man. I was just recently reading to my boys, the Farmer Boy by Laura Ingalls Wilder, about, Almanzo Wilder, and just that proximity to his father, and just the awe that he had for his father, but also just learning everything from him, all these amazing skills with his hands and things like that. And we don't have hardly, when the Industrial Revolution took the man out of the home, sent him to a factory,
right?
Where he was working all day long and come home dead tired, or working in a coal mine or wherever he happened to be. The boys were spending dramatically more time with mom, and there was something that we lost when that transition happened.
Right. You talk about also many 30-something-year-old men are living very much like overgrown teenagers for whom manhood is an ideal they have no idea how to attain. Do you see that?
Oh yeah, I think so, and I think there's a deep insecurity, among men today, young men today. Where they kind of look even at where men of the past used to be at their age, and like, oh my goodness, like I barely started life. Maybe I'm still living in my parents' basement, or maybe I'm just starting out and still trying to figure out what my calling is and things like that. And I think there's a deep insecurity, and it's getting later and later. It used to be maybe mid-20s that would last. Now it's 30s, mid-30s, where people are still trying to figure out what it means to be a man and how to make that transition.
Is that because society keeps giving them the idea that there's something that they're missing out there that's still to come? Yes. Or is it that also there's a safety net between a family safety net combined with, in a sense, a government safety net, that one isn't quite always on the edge as someone might have been in the past?
Right. Yeah, I think one missing ingredient is necessity. I mean, I think in the past you had to sink or swim. You had to make a living, or you wouldn't survive. And mom and dad couldn't afford to take you back home.
And that was the thing they couldn't afford. They would, like, you had to move out. We still have extra kids here that we're raising now, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think our culture has increased those safety nets, but I also think there's choice overload. Like you mentioned, too many choices almost. Like, well, what do I want to do? I mean, there's like 50,000 options, and I can go get more education, or I can go into this field or that field, and so many more options than we used to have, and it makes it difficult.
Now, the many faces of manhood, I thought this was an interesting juxtaposition, where you say, who's more of a real man, General George Patton or Mr. Rogers? And I was thinking about that. I was saying, well, if you ask people this in the late 50s, they would have said George Patton.
Absolutely, yeah.
But, you know, from the 70s, let's say the 80s sort of on, there'd probably be more people who would say Mr. Rogers.
Mm-hmm.
Why did you draw that comparison?
I threw that in there just to kind of disorient people a little bit, but also to illustrate that manhood has many faces. And look, you know, General Patton and Fred Rogers were both following their vocation. Mm-hmm. And they had God-given abilities, and they were putting them to use in service of others. You know, Fred Rogers, his whole mission was to use media to make goodness attractive. Mm-hmm. And not all that different than what EWTN is doing, obviously not in the religious context, but you know, and also General Patton was using his strategic mind and everything to achieve military victory. And those are both God-given callings. They both had talents, but they were also both incredibly disciplined. A lot of people think of Mr. Rogers, oh, soft, you know, just kind of. But he was incredibly disciplined. You know, every day he'd swim for an hour. You know, he would. Right. Every part of the show is completely scripted. You know, but it was all for a purpose, for the good of others. He was serving. You know, and he would say frequently, "Life is for service," and General Patton as well.
And of course, he was a Presbyterian minister.
Yeah, and you know, General Patton would say something very similar, probably with a few curse words thrown in. You know, but it was all about serving others with the talents that you've been given and developing them to their full potential. And I think that's what manhood is really.
And you make that point. Nor should we insist that all men look the same, conforming to an arbitrarily chosen archetype, unless, of course, the archetype is Jesus Christ, for he alone. Completely integrated masculinity. That's what it actually looks like. So, now you also talk about the fact that virtue is what makes a man, but virtue is one of those things that you don't hear a lot about anymore.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's almost a dirty word in our culture, the idea of virtue, and yet it's absolutely essential to what a man is. What separates a boy from a man is not merely biology. Again, it's that self-possession, that ability to rein in yourself and to be master of yourself. But you know, and many men want to become the most powerful. They want to be the best, the top dog, or whatever, and yet they're not willing to be master of themselves first. And you must first learn to control yourself before you can in any way hope to be the leader of others. And so it's really about, you know, God has given us these instincts. You know, men are more aggressive. I mean, my boys just came out of the womb fighting. You know, they just.
Oh, it wasn't because of the way you raised them, or anything?
Yeah, like that. Everything's a weapon. Everything. And we have.
So you do believe in original sin?
I do. Yes.
Clearly,
yes. But hey, that masculine aggressiveness can very easily do a ton of damage. And I think what we see in our culture is that those masculine instincts that are good and healthy in and of themselves, but if they're not reined in, they're not mastered. It's kind of like a stallion, you know. If it's not reined in, it's not mastered. It can do a lot of damage. You know, you got to break it. You got to bring it under control. You got to teach it. And when we achieve virtue, that's what we're doing. We're making the habit of choosing what's good and what's right easy.
Do you also see with that at the same time the kind of those things, that kind of youthful exuberance of a young man? Goes into a system, a school systems that are completely basically run by women these days. And where that kind of actions, you know, where it might have been seen to be before, well, the boys will be boys and that's kind of the way they are, into, no, we want them to act more like girls because the girls are better at controlling themselves at an earlier age. And so in some ways, the things that makes guys is seen as a negative.
Right. Oh, yeah. I mean, they're not saying, let's channel this, let's bring this under control, which is really what you're doing like on a sports team or, you know, even in the military, things like that. What they're saying is, let's extinguish it altogether. You know, it's a disorder almost.
It's toxic,
to be a boy.
as we hear today.
Let's drug them up. Let's put them on, you know, all kinds of powerful psychotropic drugs to control that aggressiveness or that antsiness or that energy that boys have. And that's a totally different thing than saying, you know, hey, let's be disciplined, let's control ourselves, let's channel this energy in a good way. They're saying let's destroy it altogether because it's extremely unhealthy. Women have become the standard, girls have become the standard by which boys are measured, and that's not fair in any way.
Now in Section 10, the code, you talk about Star Trek, and I'm seeing Jean-Luc Picard, but I don't see James Tiberius Kirk here. Why don't you focus on him instead? Is he not the right kind of guy living the code?
I grew up watching. I grew up watching Next Generation, so and I love Patrick Stewart. He's a great actor. But no, I certainly admire both captains.
Now, under tradition, you talk about the myth of autonomy says that the world is a blank slate, empty of any true meaning or content except that which we give it. And that's what people kind of think about people too.
Yes,
as
absolutely.
you're indicating, that's not the case, obviously, as you see with young children.
Yeah.
So why should we care about tradition in that sense?
Well, I think it's really just a matter of common sense. If you think about the way we're born, we receive absolutely everything. We would not learn how to talk. We would not learn how to walk. We would not learn hardly anything. And I remember in sociology class in high school, they talked about these feral children that they found in 18th century France. They had no parents. I don't know how they ended up in the woods. Maybe they were dumped off. But they were like animals. They had no ability to communicate. They were just like beasts almost. And it's like it shows you to the degree to which we receive almost everything that we are, and tradition really is just receiving.
Being carried forward, really, the best of the past.
Yeah.
Catholic gentleman is a man of tradition. Also, you talk about, have you ever seen those, I'd rather be something or other bumper stickers, I'd rather be fishing, flying, I'd rather be skiing. These stickers are harmless, but you make the point that you saw one that I said, I'd rather be here, right? And you talk about quiet desperation. The thing I was going to say, and you talk about Henry David Thoreau, and all I could say is, to me, the last time I had quiet desperation was trying to get through Walden by Henry David Thoreau in high school. So I understand that connection there. But is quiet desperation an issue for men today?
Yes, I think there's a lot of men who feel like I haven't achieved my full potential. I feel like there's so much more I could be doing. There's so much more kind of unlocked inside me, and I think that as men we really need to go beyond. And again, this doesn't necessarily mean go buy a tricked out Jeep. Go fighting bears every weekend. It's not always found in that. But it is found in going above and beyond what our culture says manhood is, and just kind of that safe, domesticated, persona.
Well, maybe stop by the church and ask our Lord what he thinks about you should be doing. It's the
How
Catholic.
can I serve you?
Right, exactly. The Catholic Gentleman Living Authentic Manhood Today. The author is Sam Guzman. Pleasure to have you on, Sam. The book is available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. EWTNRC.com is the place. Join us next time, right here on Bookmark. Thanks.